All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Amphitheater Hot Shop here at the Corning Museum of Glass. My name is Eric Goldschmidt. I am the Flameworking and Properties of Glass supervisor here at the museum, and I am really psyched to introduce you to a wonderful guest artist opportunity we have this week, and particularly this afternoon. So typically in our amphitheater hot shop here, what you're going to tend to see are traditional furnace-style glass-blowing demonstrations. We have some big furnaces tucked back behind the wall here, and more often than not, our teams of glass blowers here are making traditional objects, vases, bowls, simple sculpture. But every once in a while, we bring guest artists in from potentially anywhere around the world to be able to highlight what is really going on the leading edge of glassmaking these days. So this week, we have three artists joining us. On the far end of the studio is Phil Siegel, and he's visiting us from Washington State. At the middle bench here, we have Lacey Walton, better known as Laceface out there in the glass world, and she's visiting us from Austin, Texas. And closest to me here is Chris Vickers, better known in the glass world as Hickory Glass, and he's visiting us from Vermont. Now, these three came to town Sunday evening and got to work here Monday morning. They're working on one object through the course of the entire week, and they actually showed up with quite a bit of preparation already done. So the piece that they're working on, I'll grab our sketch pad here so we can show you Lacey's sketch. Now, Lacey has been making a body of work for several years now that revolves around trees where the trunk of the tree is a figure. And these trees she is using as sort of an expressive canvas to get different ideas across. This particular piece that they're working on, the tree, the figure itself represents Mother Nature. And you can see she is holding up a tree house as well, representing humanity. So you can put the dots together there, and we have quite a wonderful statement. Now, these guys have been plugging away. We expect the finished piece to be done tomorrow, so they still have another day and a half to continue working on things. It'll have more than 200 hours of work in it, and more than 1,000 different individual components all assembled to make the final piece. So they have been cranking away. Typically with our guest artists here in the amphitheater, we ask them to work from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., take an hour for lunch somewhere in the midst of all that. And we've offered these guys the same opportunity, but they have been working well into the evenings, well past 4 o'clock. We've barely been able to stop them for lunch breaks, and actually started this morning at around 8. So they are cranking along, getting their hours in, and working on a really elaborate piece. Now, at the moment, we don't see the bigger sculpture. The big composition is in this big black oven next to me here. We want to keep the piece warm as we continue to work on it. As glass is heated, it swells or expands a little bit. As it cools, it'll contract or shrink a little. So if a piece of glass is heated or cooled too unevenly, different areas expand and contract so differently they pull apart and they crack. We call that thermal shock. That is a constant concern in the back of everybody's minds here. So as they're working, the way the pacing sort of goes, you can see they're all working on some smaller elements right now. Lacey is attaching some branch parts, building a little cluster of branches that she'll add some leaves onto. Hickory here is assembling leaves onto branches. And you'll notice he also has a whole bunch of extra rods of clear glass that are interconnecting those leaves. We call those bridges. That clear glass is just holding the leaves in place as he's attaching everything. Once everything's properly attached, all that clear glass gets removed. It will not be part of the finished object. So they are plugging away, working on the smaller details, which is one of the great benefits to flameworking. It's a great process for very finely detailed work. As they get these finer details together, they want to attach them onto the bigger composition. So as we go along, we'll pull the bigger composition out of the big oven. We'll set it right on Lacey's bench there. and she will continue to attach some of these bigger sections onto the bigger composition. So that is sort of how the process is going to go. Now, flameworking is essentially just a style of glass blowing where we use a very focused heat source. Nowadays, that heat source is a torch, and the torches these guys are all using are running on propane and oxygen. And when you mix those gases fully, you can get a flame temperature a little bit above 4,000 Fahrenheit, probably about 42 to 4,300 Fahrenheit. So they'll be working with flames that are running anywhere from about 2,000 to 4,200. Now, despite those intense flame temperatures, they're still perfectly comfortable behind the torches. There's so much oxygen pushing through the torch that it really helps to focus the heat. The heat actually stays pretty well trapped within the flame, and it's also getting pushed away from them the whole time. So they're a lot more comfortable than you might imagine when you hear the 4,000 degree number. Now, when things do start to get pretty hot on the maker, is when you're working with larger and thicker forms. Those will radiate a lot of the heat back at the artist. So with what they're working on at the moment, they're pretty comfortable. As we bring the bigger composition out, that's going to radiate some more heat at them. That gets a little less comfortable as that goes on. So some of the different details they're working on. Phil today has been hard at work on the treehouse itself. And if we have a chance to take a look at Phil's bench here, he likes to work from scale models. So Phil has actually created a little cardboard model of the treehouse that he's shooting for, which really helps them to define scale. So he knows exactly how big each glass part he needs to make needs to be to make the treehouse itself. They've also been using this on the larger composition to get a good idea how to build around where the treehouse is going to set within that larger sculpture. So we'll set that back here for Phil. So a whole lot of details coming together. Collaboration has become a real cornerstone in flameworking over the last maybe 5 to 10 years. Flameworking traditionally has been something that an individual artist sort of sits down with their own torch and they make work in a fairly intimate, quiet situation. But to make larger, more elaborate work, larger scale work, working as a team is really helpful. Now, I've been watching Lacey's work for several years now. She is a real leader in the flameworking field and has been for many years now. And I reached out to her this summer. We realized this winter we were going to have a good opportunity for a guest artist engagement. Reached out to her and asked if she would be interested in coming to work here, and also asked if she wanted to work alone or work with collaborators. And she pretty quickly realized that this treehouse design she had in mind would be an ideal piece for this engagement. And to make such a piece, she needed collaborators. And she really wanted these specific collaborators. Hickory is very well known for his wood grain pattern work and his wood bark pattern work. So the ideal guy to show us some wonderful tree patterns. So I'll grab a piece of his prep here and show that to the camera so we get a little close-up on how some of this pattern work looks here. And I'll get into a little more information about colored glass as we go along as well. So Hickory, ideal collaborator for a tree form with this wonderful bark and wood grain pattern work. Also excellent at constructing the different tree forms. And Phil, I didn't realize this beforehand, but learned this week, Phil was actually a general contractor for 15 years, has experience building homes, and is a fabulous flame worker. So what better collaborator to build a treehouse than somebody who's built multi-million-dollar homes? So yeah, we've got just the right team here to pull off this incredible piece. And yeah, so They'll get a few more of these branches ready to go. And once we have some components to be added onto the bigger sculpture, we're going to bring that out to the bench and add some new branches in there. Now, we see Phil sort of working on, I'm guessing these are going to be for the walls of, that's the back wall of our tree house. And it's been sort of an interesting process here. We've got Hickory creating the wood grain pattern in sort of a branch or a tube form. And Phil, throughout the course of the week, has been processing the wood into boards for the decking that is part of or attached to the tree that will support the tree house, and also making all of these boards to create the tree house itself. And it seems kind of fitting that the guy from Washington State, from the Pacific Northwest, is here processing these trees into boards. So this is working quite well here. Got the right team from the right locations. Now, Phil has built up this sort of framework of clear glass to hold all the colored glass in place as he's building the construction. And just as I mentioned with Hickory attaching leaves onto branches, that clear glass eventually will all be removed once all the permanent parts have been attached and added. They're going to be making a lot of attachments. That's the name of the game with where they're at right now. Attachments have to happen at the right temperature, and the angle of the attachment needs to be just right. So, the glass that they're working with here, it's what's known as borosilicate glass. And it is a particularly good glass for compositional sculpture. Borosilicate was originally invented in the 1890s by a German scientist, Otto Schott. He first invented it in a search for a better glass for lenses, for telescopes and microscopes. I mentioned how glass expands with heat and contracts with cooling. Well, if you have a lens that is expanding and contracting a lot, you're not getting the same optics from it as you're using it in a telescope or a microscope. So as that glass expands and contracts, your microscope isn't going to work so well. So Schott looked for a glass composition that wouldn't expand and contract so much, wouldn't move so much with temperature change. And he found that by adding boron oxide to the glass, he could control that rate of expansion and contraction. And so the first bits of borosilicate glass were intended for lenses, but it was figured out pretty quickly after that as science was continuing to advance and scientists were getting more elaborate in their experimentation, they needed a better material for their labware. If they were to heat or cool a piece of soda lime glass, like what we make windows from or what we make most glass objects from, if you heat or cool that glass too quickly, it cracks. Not very effective in a laboratory. So they figured out pretty quickly that this new borosilicate glass would be ideal for making scientific laboratory apparatus as well. So that has been one of the biggest uses of borosilicate. Corning Incorporated, our partners here in Corning, New York, they discovered pretty quickly that borosilicate glass was an ideal material to use for railroad lanterns. Railroad lanterns back at the early 1900s would have been made from soda lime glass, and if you've got a hot light bulb or you have maybe a gas lantern and all of a sudden it starts raining and that cover glass expands and contracts too much, a drop of rain hits it, it cracks, the light goes out. So Corning figured out pretty early on that using that composition of glass was ideal for railroad lanterns. And they continue to figure out that, hey, we want to produce more of this stuff. We want to be able to mass produce it to use it for the scientific laboratory field as well. So a lot of this glass had been produced in this area for many years. It isn't any longer. But because this glass tolerates temperature change so well, it's ideal for this style of compositional sculpture. By using a glass that tolerates temperature change so well, They can get away with working on specific details and then attaching those details to a larger composition without having to worry so much about thermal shock and things cracking. So ideal material. But as you make attachments with soda lime or with borosilicate glass, it's crucial both pieces of glass are the right temperature. So as they touch together, they really flow together and you'll get a permanent attachment. If the glass is a little too cool as you connect it, it will not fuse permanently and it will come apart as the glass cools. And then another issue they have to watch out for with these attachments, acute angles. They don't want to leave really sharp acute angles where the different parts come together. If they do, as the glass cools and contracts, it will pull those angles apart and it will crack. So as they're making all these attachments, they're watching the glow of the glass very closely to make sure the temperature's right as they make the initial attachment. And then they take a close look at the attachment, and if there's any question of how the angles come together, you'll notice they bring out their hand torches, these little torches they can hold in their hands, and they can go back into those angles, melt the glass a little more. As it melts more, it curves, and once it's curved, it's fine. A curved connection works well. So that's what Lacey and Chris are up to here, just refining all these connections. The last thing in the world you want is one weak little connection in the midst of a huge composition. The whole structure is only as strong as that one weak bond. So they want to make sure all these connections are just right before adding them on to the larger composition. Same thing with Phil here. He is attaching all these panels of glass to create the treehouse structure. And as he goes along, he adds little touches of glass in between each panel so they're fused and connected together permanently. And then he gets back in there with a hand torch, lets that glass really flow, gets a nice attachment on there. So for those of you just joining us here in the amphitheater, we are live streaming this demonstration. It is currently up on our YouTube channel at the moment. So I will be speaking to our live audience and also to the internet here. If you all in our live audience happen to have any questions, you can throw your hand up in the air. I'll be happy to answer any questions. And those of you on the live stream, if you guys have any questions, type them into the chat and they will be passed over to me. And I'll do my best to answer them or pass them off to our guest artists here to answer. So please feel free to get in touch with us and interact. We'll let these guys continue to crank along here. I know Phil, part of what he's been working on is the roof of the tree house as well. And that's what all these elements are that he's got on the edge of the bench here. These big thick rods, he will heat up and press into some flatter panel pieces. And then these get interconnected. And this is a row of shingles for the roof of the tree house. And I suspect that's what he's working with now. You're going to make more of the shingles? Yep. Yeah, a lot of shingles to make. Yeah, there are an awful lot of parts to complete this piece. So for those of you who just strolled into the amphitheater, we'll show you the drawing, Lacey's sketch of the piece that these guys are after here. Can you catch me through here? So we'll flash that up on the screen here. So a tree where the core, the trunk of the tree is a female figure representing Mother Nature, and then the tree house within that tree as well. So Mother Nature sort of supporting humanity is the sort of the message with this piece here. And as I mentioned to our web audience, these guys are all visiting us from locations outside of the Corning area and are here working with us for the week. You have a question up there? It will be as big as they can fit in that black oven there. When they all showed up here on Sunday, the first thing they did was measure the oven. That is their limitation. Ultimately, as the piece is finished, it needs to be cooled slowly and evenly. And that oven is the one that they're sort of shooting for there. If by chance it gets a little too large, we do have plenty of larger ovens around here. But this sort of a door setup is ideal for working in and out of the oven as they're building it. So this is really the oven that they're focused on filling. It's 22 inches tall, interior dimension. I think we said it was 28 inches wide and maybe 18 deep. So they've got to keep it within those dimensions. Currently, it's about 21 inches tall. So I think they know their vertical limit. Yeah. So they won't be building any further vertically, but they're now at the stage of filling in a lot of the leaf and branch canopy. So once these guys get a couple more of these branches ready to go, and it looks like Hickory just about has something ready there, and Lacey's getting another section all prepared here as well. So in just a few minutes, we'll take the larger composition out of the oven. You'll see the scale and the complexity and the beauty of what they've got going on already. But typically when you see us demonstrate here at the museum, our demos are maybe 15 to 25 minutes. We come into the studio, we make a quick piece of glass from start to finish. You don't typically see work like this. And work on this scale and complexity you don't typically see in public. There are several artists who do sort of work on this scale and work on this complexity. There are plenty of flame workers nowadays who are spending many days working on a piece. Lacey, some of her pieces take months to create, and it's not common that you'll see them in a public setting. Typically, if she's working on a piece this complex, she's at her home studio. There are no distractions there, so you can just sort of lock in on what she's doing. So it's a really unique opportunity to see this level of work going on here in the public. So we are quite thankful that these guys were willing to come out here to visit us and really sort of push the envelope. They are absolutely making the most of this opportunity and giving us an opportunity to really see that high level of work.
Somebody is asking if this is Chinese, Indian, or U.S. Thoro glass, and somebody else wants to know if this is their own equipment.
Okay, a couple of questions from the web. Somebody wants to know where the borosilicate glass comes from. Let's see. We have a mixture of things going on here. So the wood grain color that Hickory is using the most of, which one is that? I know it's Glass Alchemy. Which color? Amazon Night from Glass Alchemy, which is an American company. They're up in Oregon. And the clear glass we've got going on here, there's some American Pyrex. I believe there's some shot glass in there as well, which comes from Germany. So there's glass from really all over the place in here. Cymax, which comes from the Czech Republic as well for some of the clear glass. We've got some North Star colored glass, which also comes from Oregon. And what else do we have? We've got some dichroic glass that Phil is adding into the treehouse that they're in Los Angeles. What was the company's name again? Pacific Art Glass makes the dichroic glass that Phil will be working with here. So yeah, actually mostly glass, and particularly the color coming from the U.S. But yeah, great glass is made all around the world. So it's possible to get great materials from many different countries. And what was the other question there? Is it their equipment? Some is and some is not. So Phil brought his own torches. They all brought all their own hand tools. Hickory brought his own torches. And for Lacey, we had the torches she wanted to use already here on site, so she's using torches that we provided. But again, they all have their own hand tools. So your hand tools and also your torch, as you work with glass through the years, they really become an extension of your hands and extension of your soul, really. You get to making so much work with your tools that you really get a very specific feel for the tension of your tweezers or the way your shears cut or you get a real feel for the way the knobs on your torch adjust your specific flame settings. So it is really important to be tuned in with the equipment that you're using, especially as you get into more elaborate work. You don't want to have to think twice about the equipment you're using. You want to flow with it. Yes, sir? Is it a special composition of gas that they're working with? They are using a mixture of propane and oxygen. It is important with flame working that we use clean burning fuels. A lot of welders come through here and assume, oh, I can just use my acetylene oxygen torch and that will do fine. The temperatures are fine with acetylene and oxygen, but all the carbon that it spits out actually cooks into the glass and you sort of scum up the glass. So it's crucial to use a clean burning fuel. So for flame working nowadays, we use either propane, methane, natural gas, methane, or sometimes hydrogen if we're melting a really high melting temperature glass. And any of those three we would mix with oxygen to accelerate the flame temperature. Yeah. So it needs to be a clean burning fuel, and it needs to be a fuel that can either burn on its own or with a mixture of oxygen to get up. Ideally for what they're doing, you want a flame that'll get to temperatures that are at least over 3,500 or so. And yeah, these torches get well beyond that. They get well above 4,000 even. So yeah, specific gases are definitely crucial. So it looks like Phil is working on some of the fascia work for the tree house here. And it seems like Lacey has a branch structure that is almost ready to be attached to the rest of the mass. She just put a different handle on the tip of the branch. We use the clear glass as handles so that we can attach these different masses to that larger composition. The easiest way to hold on to that thing is to just do it with another rod of glass. Now, people are often surprised when they watch flame working for the first time and see how we actually hold the glass in our bare hands as we're melting it. Thankfully, glass doesn't conduct heat very well. It's a very good insulator, but a lousy conductor, so the heat won't travel through the glass out to where her hands are. Now, I just mentioned we don't typically wear gloves, but there are times when we need to wear gloves. So Phil just put on a couple of Kevlar gloves. He's going to grab the composition out of the oven here, put it out on the table, so Lacey can add another branch onto it. So this gives us our first really good view of how much work these guys have gotten done this week. So as you have a chance to dig in here, you'll notice there is a female form within there. Probably the easiest way to pick up on that female form, the head is actually looking straight at Lacey right now. So these guys have just identified the spot where they're going to attach this next branch, and this teamwork is really helpful for this. So Phil's heating up the spot on the sculpture where the branch is going to be attached. That allows Lacey to focus her efforts on heating up the tip of the branch to be attached. As they get the temperatures just right, Phil just let Lacey know he's ready. She can get it attached right on there. Sort of pressing in a little bit, pulling out a little bit to help smooth out that attachment, getting it all situated just right. Now, it's connected, but she needs to clean up that attachment. She wants it to look more natural. We also want to make sure we're not leaving acute angles in there. As I had mentioned, that can be an issue. So she's waiting for that initial attachment to firm up. Then she'll interconnect that branch to another one of the branches on there. By attaching in that second location, that second attachment will hold the piece in place, and she'll be able to go back to the initial attachment, clean that up, get it all nice and neat, get it all nice and secure, and then she can remove any extraneous attachments if she needs to after that. So it's this process of making the initial attachment, getting that piece braced in place, and then reheating that initial attachment to get it nice and clean. These guys are also talking about the next moves they're going to want to make. And the clock is ticking. We don't want to keep this sculpture out of the oven for too long. Maybe 10 minutes, not much longer than that. And also, as the piece is out of the oven, it's cooling the whole time. The whole piece is cooling except where they're placing the flames. So the areas where they're placing the flames, they can continue to work there for a while. But now as the rest of the piece is cooling down, they don't want to let those flames hit any other areas of the sculpture. If they do, we run the risk of things cracking. So she's interconnecting a couple of the leaves on opposing branches to get that braced in place. And then she can dive back into the initial attachment where branch meets branch to get that all cleaned up. These hand torches they've got are very helpful for getting into these little spots here, getting those all cleaned up. As flameworkers started really using these hand torches in their practice more regularly over maybe the last 10 to 15 years, it has really raised the level of complexity of a lot of the work that we're seeing folks produce. Glass blowing in general and also flameworking in general, a lot of the techniques have remained the same for hundreds, if not thousands of years. But what does change is technology, heating technology. And as we get some new heating technology, it sort of opens us up to new potential with the finished work we can make. These hand torches are very helpful that way. Really allows you to dive into complex detail work, get everything neatly refined. So a lot of communication going on over here too. The piece is on a lazy Susan, so they can turn it. So they were just sort of communicating about when they're ready to turn to get to another angle on the piece, get the flames into some different areas. And communicating about what parts can be removed or what needs refinement in the attachment. So Lacey just let Phil know that he can remove this bridge, this big rod of clear glass that he's now heating. That was placed there just to hold other branches together while they made additional attachments. They're done making those attachments, or different connections within the branches are holding everything in place. So now that clear glass can come off of here. So lots of communication. And anytime you collaborate with another artist, it's not an easy thing. You really have to make sure you're working with somebody you can work with, that you relate well with, that you communicate well with, somebody you trust and respect, who is going to respect the work that you're both after. Not an easy thing. And also in a situation like this, somebody you trust to have a 4,000 degree flame right next to your hand also. So it's a lot of sort of social connection to be able to collaborate together effectively as well. And Lacey and Phil have made a couple of pieces together in the past, but this team here, they've never worked with Hickory before, and they've also never worked as a group of three before, but they're very skilled glassmakers and seem to be collaborating very effectively. All right, so they've got that new addition added on there. Time to put the piece back in the oven. Just taking one last look to see what the next move might be. But now we're going to go back into the oven. Yeah, so they are sort of right at the limit there. I think we've got about a ½ inch of clearance between that top branch and leaf and the roof of the kiln here. It really is. Yeah. So I think we know we can't go too much more vertically there. That's the top. All right, there we have it. Lacey confirms that is the top. Well, it better be, otherwise you're just going to knock it off anyways. Sure.
I have two. I have one asking why there's no offhand heat-based devoted flame annealer, and then I have a conceptual one.
Okay, question from the web. Why is there no offhand?
Yeah. Flame makers.
No, offhand flame annealer. Maybe a Bunsen burner? Is that what this person is referring to? I'm not entirely certain what they're after. If they're thinking about a Bunsen burner, like a little flame that we would have on the bench top, that's just not how these guys are choosing to go about this piece. Uh, Different artists have different bits of equipment that they're more or less comfortable with. Personally, I do use a Bunsen burner quite a bit in a lot of the compositional work that I do. Having a Bunsen burner on your bench top is just another gentle flame that you can use to sort of reheat things, keep them warm as you're continuing to build. A Bunsen burner wouldn't do these guys much good for the bigger composition. It just wouldn't be positioned properly, and they've got to sort of work around the sculpture a little too much to have a Bunsen sort of in the way there. So if that is what that person's referring to, it's how these guys choose to work, and particularly for an object like this, just not the heat source that they need. And another question?
This one might need to go straight to Lacey, but how long does it take them to come up with the concept, and do they make changes as they work?
Aha. So, Lacey, how long does it take for you to come up with a concept like this?
Typically, I just get an idea. It just appears to me at some point. Like I'll be inspired. I'm usually inspired a lot by nature, by feminine empowerment, and so sometimes I'll just like it'll just snap into my head. I'll see something, and then I'll have like this whole vision instantly appear, and so I'll typically go down and sketch it when that happens. But I get just inspired from the world around me, and every piece that I make, I like to have a message or a concept. To me, that's like it's like the purpose of why I'm doing what I do is I wanna speak to humanity through the source and the inspiration of the world. So yeah, I mean, sometimes I'll have an idea for a piece, and then I won't make that piece for a year or two. So
Is that the case with this piece?
yes, actually,
Yeah.
I got the idea for this piece about 2 years ago as sort of an elaboration on a body of work that I had started doing trees, and knew that I wanted to make a tree house, especially grand, because tree houses are awesome, and I was waiting for the perfect occasion. So yes, Eric
Right on.
got me the perfect occasion to do that. So.
Nice. All right. So, let's see. Lacey's designs can develop over time. Inspiration comes from the natural world, comes from feminine empowerment, and ideas can take different amounts of time to develop. The particular idea that these guys are working on right now is something that did come to her a while ago. Sometimes the ideas sort of ruminate for a year or for months or even a few years. So yeah, it's hard to sort of nail down a specific amount of time. Inspiration comes at different times and in different ways. And yeah, she makes sure to sketch ideas out as they develop. And thankfully, we've got this great sketch to work from here as well. And yeah, she saved just the right engagement to go at it with this particular design here. So yeah, I don't know if we can nail down a specific time length, but yeah, inspiration comes and goes, and a big time to when you feel inspiration, I think as you grow as an artist, you realize that you have an idea that's worth capturing, and as you continue to develop ideas, you realize how important those ideas are and what are the sort of the better ones to dive into at specific times in your career. Awesome. All right. Anything else from the web there? All righty. Excellent. So, yeah, the piece is back soaking in our oven here. Now, just like your oven in your kitchen at home, you open the oven, you lose a whole lot of heat. It takes a little while for the oven to recuperate that heat. So we've got to wait a little bit, let the oven get back up to temperature, let that core composition come back up to temperature. Then they can add on to it. In the meantime, working on those smaller details. Yes, sir. The leaves came pre-made because Lacey made them before coming here. Yeah, none of this material has been sculpted before coming here. The material they start with are tubes and rods. So for the wood grain pattern, Hickory has been working from solid rods of colored glass. For the leaves, same thing. Lacey started with rods that look just like that brown one, except green. And yeah, she had to sculpt them. And she showed up with that bag pretty full of leaves. We wanted to know how many leaves, how many gumballs were in the jar. So Phil and Hickory actually counted them Tuesday morning. 766 leaves is what she showed up with. And I'm wondering if we're going to need more. You guys are ripping right through them there. Yeah, just enough. Let's hope. Nice. She brought materials to make more if we need them, so that's good to know. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Yeah, so the colored glass they're working with, they're made by companies that make colored glass specifically for artists to use. Making colored glass, you are going to melt different metal oxides and chlorides together with the ingredients for clear glass. And it's a very precise bit of chemistry to really get consistent quality colored glass. It can also be fairly toxic. Some of the materials that go in as colorants can be pretty nasty to work with. So most of us artists prefer just to work with colored glass that are made by these expert companies. They've got the chemists who know exactly what they're doing. They've got the right safety systems in place. So most artists tend to work with pre-manufactured color. There are some artists, though, who do make their own colored glass, or some make maybe a few of the colors in the palette that they work with and then buy others. But the vast majority of glass artists are working with color made by other companies. So I've been enjoying Phil's process here. He's trying to make all these individual shingles for the roof of the treehouse, and he wants them to match in size. So he starts with a rod of the mix of colored glasses, sort of like this, or even these bigger ones here, pulls them down into some smaller rods, and then he sort of segments the smaller rod. So he's got even amounts of material, and then he can flatten each of those sort of football shapes there, and he will get nice consistent shingles for his roof. So a very smart way to get details to match and get scale to match. It can be sort of tricky to get all your proportions to really align. If you're making one part, setting it in the oven, you don't have a guide to work from for the next part. So really smart way to go about it here, and also to work fairly quickly and efficiently. Are the shingles also Hickory's prep? Yes, they are. Yeah. Yeah, so Hickory makes a few different types of wood grain and wood bark patterns. And so, yeah, he's arranged a couple different types of patterning, one for the branches and another different bit of patterning for these shingles. Nice. All right, so Lacey is hard at work on another branch structure. And you see how complex that web of clear glass can get, all these bridges. She wants to hold each individual leaf in place as she refines the attachment and the connections together. And Phil has the back wall of the treehouse out of the oven again, and sort of trimming it down to size here. And I really love the visual texture of these boards. So he's taking the branch prep that Hickory has been making and then pressing them into flat boards, and you wind up with this really cool green texture on the boards. So they're getting all sorts of interesting, really nice natural patterns going on. So Phil has created all these different boards and connected them, and then he can sort of trim them down to the specific dimensions he needs for all the different walls and the shingles and the paneling. He made the decking that the treehouse is going to sit on that you saw attached to the bigger composition earlier. He made most of that Monday and Tuesday. They got it attached Tuesday and started to build around it pretty quickly. So a whole lot going on here. Now, I mentioned they're going to be working on this piece all week. Well, today's just Thursday. They're still going to be working on it tomorrow. Ultimately, when they finish the piece, and probably a few days into next week, we'll put this video back up onto YouTube to live there for posterity, and we'll have some images of the final, really finished piece on that video as well. We are posting as much as we can on the Corning Museum of Glass social media channels. Lacey is in the midst of taking over our Instagram feed, so she's been adding quite a bit on there. And we are going to continue to show how this piece develops through the next day and a half as they go along. We are going to live stream until 4 o'clock today, but these guys will probably continue in the studio here until about 7 o'clock tonight. They have a lot to put together. It's a very elaborate composition, going to take a while. So Lacey and Phil just communicating about the next big move that they're going to make. The oven has been back up to temperature, so we generally have been waiting for the oven to get back up around 1050 Fahrenheit. And once it holds there for about 5 minutes, then we feel safe bringing the composition back out of the oven and making the next big move with it. So that'll be coming shortly. And in the meantime, they continue to crank away on the finer elements of the piece. There are many different approaches to glass making, different processes we can use. Even within the same process within flameworking, there are a lot of different approaches, different ways that people like to handle the material, different tools they might use, even to accomplish the same effect for a finished effect. So it's quite nice to have a chance to see how other artists work. Even amongst just the three of these folks here, they have some different approaches. They've been sharing some differences in techniques and how they handle things. And a lot to be gained by collaborating with others. You really have a chance to dig into how they make their work and why. A great opportunity to learn more from each other. And also for us here at the museum, bringing in artists who work in different styles. We love to highlight that for our audiences. We also love it for our own selfish reasons, where we learn a lot as makers as well. So great opportunity all the way around here. Now, ultimately, this piece, I haven't really talked about the function of it yet. The tree itself is a standalone sculpture. The tree house is actually going to function as a pipe. And it will be fully functional. I imagine at some point it will probably get used. And there is a whole field of thousands and thousands of flameworkers across this country and around the world who are making incredible flamework sculptures that function as pipes, largely intended for the cannabis market. And this piece will function that way as well. And a lot of the folks who are making this pipe work are really sort of leading the flameworking field nowadays. It is an area where people are able to make incredible strides with the material and really sort of challenge its potential. There is now a collector market that is massive for their work. And these are a few of the leading artists in that field. And it's a real pleasure to have them here, have them making their work, going at it. It's nice that they have the freedom to be able to make work like this in a setting like this. There was a time when they could not. And even though they're making beautiful artwork, it wasn't quite seen that way. In 2003, in fact, as the glass pipe movement was really accelerating, there were a number of folks who got into quite a bit of trouble. The Attorney General of the U.S., John Ashcroft, back in 2003, launched a program called Operation Pipe Dream, where they actually were arresting glass makers who were making pipes. The reason they sort of dove into that issue was that people were selling things across state lines and weren't necessarily checking on age limitations of folks. And so a lot of the flame workers in the pipe scene do tend to go still by nicknames, and they had to sort of take their craft underground and hide out in their garages, their basements. And nowadays, with a little more acceptance, they're able to really sort of take things to the public and really show us how this craft has grown and take it to the ultimate level. So it's wonderful that we now have the opportunity to feature stuff like this here at the museum as well. All right. Well, here is our composition. Lacey's got another branch ready to go. So they'll sort of eye out exactly where they want to attach this one. Making sure it's not going any taller than the rest of these here. So finding the right spot to set that in and really sort of fill out the canopy. All right, so they found the spot. Phil's going to heat up the spot on the composition. Lacey is heating up the tip of that branch where it will be attached. Getting their temperatures just right. And Phil will let Lacey know when he's got that spot ready to go. And she'll dive right in. So here we go. Get this next bit attached. And it stays soft for a few seconds, so she can make a few little adjustments here. Get that all aligned properly. And once she has it aligned properly, we want to interconnect it, connect it to another area of the sculpture that won't move at all. And then she can go back to that initial attachment and clean it up and refine it with the hand torch. Make sure it's all a nice flow of the line of the sculpture, but also make sure that everything is fused properly and all the angles are connected properly. So just sort of reaching in here, just going to touch a couple of those leaves together, and those will be the bridge that will hold those branches in place. So she can then go back and refine the attachment of branch to branch. And a piece like this, Lacey has been working on a series of similar pieces for, I guess, at least 5 years now, right? And 2018, she started sort of diving into these expressive tree forms. And she really does like to fill in all that detail and really make sure that the canopy of the leaves is nice and full and rich in there. And eventually it becomes quite a trick to get those last few branches in there, make sure they're placed in properly, that it looks natural, it's properly filled in. So she has sort of a vision of where this needs to get to and how all these gaps need to be filled. So just refining that attachment. She's using gravity quite a bit as well. Hard to see from a distance, but to get the flow of the attachment, the curve just right, she's heating glass and letting it flow downwards to sort of fill in the curves and fill in the angles just right. Gravity is a very important influence on what we do with molten glass. When you first start working with molten glass, you sort of fight gravity. As the glass gets too hot for you to control, it just starts dripping out of control. But as you gain control and mastery over the material, you really start to use gravity as a tool, almost like a third hand at times. So that camera shot, you can really see the decking very nicely there. That's where the tree house is going to set. Phil made that beautiful railing for the decking as well. And all these little fine details are what really set a piece like this off. Lacey's just doing a little bit of cleanup of that top branch there. When she went to attach the head onto the neck and shoulders of the figure, that branch that she's working on right now is hollow, and she had a hollow tube attached to that. The connection between the head and the rest of the body is hollow as well. And when you make a connection of hollow to hollow, it's very helpful if you can blow in and inflate the glass to sort of stretch it back out and get that connection so it's nice and clean and uniform. So she's just cleaning up some of the clear glass that had been left over. She had a clear tube attached to the colored glass until she finished the attachment and removed most of that tube, and now she's just finishing off and cleaning up the last bits of the clear and also sealing off what had been an open hollow form here, so it won't have a hole in it anymore, or at least not in this particular spot. So just getting that cleaned up. Phil's already got his Kevlar gloves back on. We know the piece needs to get back in the oven shortly. What's that? Actually, all those root pieces are hollow. Yeah, Lacey, I didn't realize it from previous pieces like this that I've seen of hers, but a very smart move to keep the weight of the piece down. Those are hollow tubes. They are sealed at both ends of the tube, but before making the attachments, she'd pop a little hole in the side of those branches as well. One thing we need to watch out for, if you completely seal off a piece of glass and then get it up to melting temperature again, it can create a vacuum. If the air on the inside of the tube is cooler than what's outside of it, it forms a vacuum and the glass sucks itself in, it collapses. Or if the air inside of the tube is hotter than what's around it, it expands. The air inside expands and it will actually start to cause the glass to swell. It can even pop open. So it is important, the way she did construct all the sort of roots and branches, that they are hollow and have a hole in them so that air pressure can move in and out of the form. So she's thought way ahead on that move, and a very wise idea. It keeps the weight of the piece down by having those sections hollow. And also we do run into more issues of thermal shock, of the glass cracking with temperature change with thicker glass than we do with the thickness of those particular hollow tubes. If the glass is really thick, the odds of the surface becoming a very different temperature from the core are much greater. So you can run into some different issues there, and it can be more difficult if it does crack to fuse the crack through a thicker mass of material. So working with the hollows makes a lot of sense the way she does. All right, so we've got the composition back in the oven, letting it soak, heat up a little bit more. Hickory and Lacey both working on more of these branch structures. And this is a big part of the flow of what we're going to see through the rest of the day here, is building more of these individual branch and leaf clusters, getting them attached as the composition comes up to the right temperature. And in the meantime, Phil is building the treehouse down here, trimming these boards, getting it all set up to the right scale. I really love the idea of having the three-dimensional cardboard model there. If you're going to make complex work and you need parts to fit, you need to keep the scale just right so all those different parts come together into the right proportions. Having a three-dimensional model is a great way to go. Having a drawing is a really good start, really gets you off in the right direction, but that 3D modeling is a very wise idea.
Hey, Aaron. Is the color of the trunk specifically for Hickory, or did he make that?
Is the color of the trunk of the tree specifically Hickory's pattern work? It is, yeah. There's another question for the web there. And that color work is just gorgeous. It is working out great. And Hickory has a cool technique for getting that specific sort of organic, real beautiful wood grain work. Yeah, that is just the right size. You nailed it, Phil. Nice. Yeah, so I mentioned Hickory was using really just the same rods of color to create the wood grain pattern, but the pattern has different coloration to it. He creates the differences in coloration by adjusting the mixture of gas and oxygen that are running through his torch. And that creates different chemical reactions with the colorants within the glass, and it gives him all sorts of different ranges of wood tones. So really, really thoughtful way of creating the wood grain look as well. And as these guys are working with that wood grain, it's evolving as well. Each time they heat it, it changes just a little bit more. So I haven't mentioned too much detail about our artists here, but we'll read off their bios here as well. So Chris Vickers, better known as Hickory Glass, has been working with glass since 2001. In that time, he has developed his highly recognizable style of making pieces that look like driftwood. This voice for making natural woody-looking glass has also led him to develop techniques for making birch trees and cedar wood. Most recently, Chris has been exploring a new series of burnt or rotted wood. And while much of his work involves the production of smaller, more affordable pieces, he enjoys pushing his glass-blowing abilities to new levels. He's been a contestant in 5 Pipe Classic flameworking competitions, a highly regarded challenge held annually at the Burn Gallery in Burlington, Vermont. In his second year of the competition, he won the event, and in doing so gained national recognition and really established himself within the upper echelon of the flameworking community. He's constantly inspired by the natural work. His pieces strive to combine aesthetic and functionality, and he enjoys creating pieces that will be used for many years by his collectors, and really seems to enjoy the relationship that his collectors feel in connection with using his work. So really beautiful stuff. Now, Laceface Walton was born in Grants Pass, Oregon in the early 80s. She was exposed to the blossoming art form of glass blowing and pipe making from an early age. Determined from the beginning to create beauty, Lacey fell in love with the color, fluidity, and form of glass the moment she began working on the torch in 2004. Lacey spent the next several years concentrating on growing her skills as a glass artist while simultaneously putting herself through school. After graduating with an associate degree in the arts, she became heavily involved in the expanding glass pipe art movement. In 2010, Lacey began attending several trade shows and flame-off competitions around the country. Her dedication has been rewarded by her receiving several of the pipe industry's highest honors and awards of achievements. Wishing to evolve her artistry even further, Lacey Walton found that collaborations with her friends and peers helped her to accomplish creative and innovative artworks and also enable her to think and work outside of her comfort zone. Now, Lacey creates with many of the industry's most renowned artists, motivated as a community leader to push the limitations of glass art. Her modern masterpieces of glass art exemplify the power and spirit of this amazing woman and also speak volumes for her determination to succeed as a leading woman in the male-dominated glass art industry. A quote from Lacey here: "The medium of glass is my doctrine, teaching me the ways of patience, discipline, and determination. Daily, I praise the fluid-like forms while dancing with the flames, willing them to speak and to show me the light." Beautiful quote. I love that, Lace. Very nice. All right, so Phil Siegel works and lives on the remote coast of Washington State. With no formal apprenticeship in glass or education in art, he uses his extensive background in construction and architecture to guide his own very personal artistic vision and approach to the medium. By combining the rigid form language he learned while designing architecture with the limitless flowing nature of glass, he challenges himself to achieve a marriage between fantasy and structure, and to relate his deepest life experiences through the emancipation of his innermost spiritual, intellectual, and emotional self. Beautiful. Excellent. So a little more background and insight into the mindsets of our artists here. Boy, you guys are getting quick with these now. Nice. Will there be any wizards hanging out in that tree house when it's done?
We're not 100%.
Phil is very well known in the pipe scene for some wizard functional pipes that he makes that are brilliant. They've really sort of become a trademark of his work. And we'll see what sort of time we have. I think that's going to be the biggest limitation here. I think job one is really to finish the vision that's drawn out on the sketchbook there, and then we'll see what else we have time to add into the whole structure here.
What's that? I know the house is smokable, but does it have a joint? It's got a 10 mil.
So we had a question as to what sort of apparatus is going to fit into the smoking function of the tree house here, and it will be a 10 mil joint is what Phil had to say. So a ground joint that will set right in to make a good seal. And I still don't know where all the parts of function are going to go within the tree house. I know that the chimney is going to be the mouthpiece, and where else are other elements going?
Flush with the roof right there.
Okay.
And then the function will go up inside. It'll be hidden.
Okay.
It'll be
Yeah,
very,
so the function, it will have water filtration function that will be tucked up inside of the structure of the treehouse, and the connection for the consumables, the joint area, is going to be sort of tucked into the side of the roof. So they're going to do a nice job of really sort of incorporating the function within the aesthetic of the piece. Love it. All right, so looks like Phil's about to add the back wall to the treehouse here. You can see how there's just so many levels of detail and so many attachments that need to come together to make such an elaborate piece like this. And In the earlier years of the pipe scene, the 90s through the early 2000s, we didn't see work this elaborate at all. But nowadays, people are creating more and more elaborate work. And in order for them to be able to afford to make more and more elaborate work, it's been crucial that the collector base has continued to grow. So people will actually purchase work of this nature for its real value and continue to push that value and elevate it. And yeah, it's been an interesting growth of this industry as collectors have sort of accelerated their interest and their understanding of the material and what people are making. They've also raised the intrinsic value of the objects. And now artists are really able to dive in, make incredibly elaborate work, and know that they can afford to make it, that somebody is going to be willing to pay the money they really deserve for putting so much time and so much heart into such elaborate objects. And it's been really interesting. The flameworking scene is just exploding by leaps and bounds these days. The artists are experimenting more and more. They're making more and more elaborate works. And there is a market for them to sell them for proper amounts of money. It's been a wild growth to the scene.
I want to add that it's evolved into the vaporization of cannabis concentrates and not the smoking of combusted material.
Mm-hmm.
That it's no longer not that all pieces are, but this piece is designed for that purpose, which is a vaporization of oils instead of combustion.
Yeah, Chris is pointing out the consumption of cannabis has been evolving as that scene continues to move along, and it's not just people smoking the natural flower material anymore. A lot of folks are vaporizing concentrates of material, and so that changes the apparatus that they're making and the sort of constructions they're doing, the sort of materials they're using, the shapes of the materials as well. And this particular piece is really designed for what a lot of folks would refer to as dabbing, which is vaporizing these concentrates and imbibing them that way. So as sort of that industry, the cannabis industry evolves, these guys are also evolving what they're making and what they're creating to be able to use cannabis. Yes, sir.
Noticing with Lacey's torch, it's when she switches down from the second stage down to the smaller, just center torch, there's a lot of propane still coming out of that. Is that something that she has tuned the torch to do to keep the heat base coming down, or is it just something good?
So the question here is, Lacey has a foot pedal under her bench there that she's using to adjust the torch. The flame she has going now is just sort of what we call the inner stage or the inner fire. There are a couple other rings around that allow her to create a much bigger flame. The foot pedal allows her to make that adjustment, and it controls the flow of gases through the hoses out to the torch. The longer the hoses are, the longer it takes for that gas to exhaust out of the hose and out of the torch. So it takes a little longer for the flame to adjust as she hits the pedal. So yeah, it's not something that she necessarily wants to have happen and take a while. It's just a function of how much length of hose we have there.
Kind of annoying, actually.
Yeah, not her favorite thing. Huh. Huh. All right. All right. Looks like Lacey is starting to punty up to the top of another branch component here, which tells me she's probably getting close to wanting to attach it to the rest of the structure, which you would be safe to do. So we're constantly keeping an eye on the oven back here too. We want to make sure, first of all, that it's gotten back up to 1050 Fahrenheit before we open the door, but also ideally we want it at 1050 for about 5 minutes to really soak the piece at 1050 before it comes out to the bench for the next big move.
Do you have any finished ones in there?
This one's about done.
And that's it? You don't have any other ones? Okay.
All right. Phil's got the gloves ready to go. We going in? All righty, here we go. Okay. We've got the composition out of the oven. We'll figure out exactly where we want this branch to land. Finding the spot here, and once she figures out exactly where this should be attached, Phil's going to dive into that spot, start heating up the spot on the composition where we want this attached. Lacey will get the bottom of that branch just the right temperature, and we'll get them attached. So I know folks like to ask how much of a piece like this is planned, and then how much are you sort of adjusting on the fly. This gives you a pretty good idea. You saw the sketch. The rough idea is all drawn out. Lacey does have a fairly specific vision in her mind, but also as they go along, these are organic forms. She's sort of feeling out exactly where that placement needs to happen to realize that overall vision. So it's a largely developed idea, but there is some improvisation as you go along. So here we go. Get this other branch attached. And if you watch really closely, you'll notice as she makes the attachments, she pushes and then pulls just a little bit. And that helps to clean up that connection. I had mentioned early on that we don't want sharp, acute angles where different parts come together. By doing that little bit of a pull after she's finished pushing and attaching, that helps to smooth in those angles and create curves rather than setting up the sharp, acute angles. She'll still need to get in there, clean it up with a hand torch a bit, but that little bit of a pull is pretty helpful. So for those of you who are looking to grow your flame working, this is a great example of how to do things here. Create very finely detailed things as individual components, build them into a composition. That probably makes it sound a lot simpler than it actually is, but that is a nice way to build brilliant work. The torch really allows you to create very finely detailed individual objects, and then to really build up the scale and a nice elaborate composition, making all those attachments, getting those finely detailed components together cleanly. It's amazing the level of work one can accomplish on the torch that way. All right, so she just bridged one of the leaves to one of the larger branches, so that's going to hold it in place. Now she can get back in and clean up that the branch to branch attachment. In the meantime, Phil is removing the rest of the little bit of clear glass that's left over from the handle that Lacey had used to support the branch as she was making the attachment. Some great teamwork. We talked earlier before we went live with the live stream about how you need to trust your collaborator, especially when you're both sort of working around the sculpture with the hand torches. And I think all of us have been zapped by a collaborator at one time or another. Does happen. Haven't seen these guys do it to each other yet. Not going to happen. All right. Yeah, yep. Phil pointing out, always make sure that torch is facing away from yourself and your collaborator. Yeah. So Phil's pointing out another interesting thing for gauging temperature here. You'll notice as the piece first comes out of the oven, the leaves look fairly orangey. They look sort of a dull, opaque orange, not the bright, glowing orange that the glass is when it's molten. But as it sits out on the table, that orange fades and we get more and more dense green color. That's a good indicator as to how much the glass is cooling and gives them another indicator as to how much time they have to continue working before the composition needs to get into the oven.
I got another little one ready to go.
Great.
I'm going to do a little one this time, so that'll be ready to go.
All right, so the composition is back in the oven. We're going to let that come back up to temperature, and Hickory has a couple more branches that are ready to go. And this, again, this is sort of the pacing. Phil's going to dive back into working on the treehouse. Looks like he's got a couple rows of shingles that he's going to set into the oven here. We want to pre-warm those a bit before he tries to attach them into the composition. So pop those in the oven. The oven's going to warm the glass more slowly than the flame will. With the ovens at 1,050 Fahrenheit, that's a pretty comfortable step for the glass to make from room temperature to 1,050. But as they go from room temperature to 4,000, we run into some issues there. So he'll just let those soak in the oven for a few minutes. They're fairly thin, so they should warm up pretty quickly. And then he can be comfortable starting to lay the layers of shingles over one another to fill in the roof. Really fun to see this all come together. All these crazy details. On Tuesday, we were sort of discussing design ideas for the railing around the decking there. And Phil came up with a great solution of some really nice, would they be referred to as balusters? Is that what those would be technically? Yeah, spindles or balusters, sort of the vertical pieces between the horizontal pieces of the railing of the deck. So not a bad idea to have a guy who used to build homes working on your treehouse. You do have a special set of skills, Phil. This has been quite a treat for me personally, having these guys here too. I have known Lacey a bit for, I guess, maybe 8 years or so, 7 or 8 years, and been watching her work pretty closely. We've talked a few times at different conferences and gatherings of glass makers. Hickory's work, I used to live in Vermont, so I very much keep track of glass that gets made up there. So his work has been standing out to me for a number of years. Phil, there was one particular piece you had at the DFO, I think in 2016, that was a beautiful opaline figurative piece that was just blew my mind. So I made sure to keep tracking your works and seeing that piece. And to get you all here working together is fantastic. This has been my first opportunity to really start to get to know Phil and get to know Hickory and also get to know Lacey on some deeper levels here. So it's been wonderful. It's nice to get you guys in here. Thank you for sharing. Good stuff. You bet. Yeah, we've been diving into all sorts of deeper conversations about where the pipe industry came from, where it's going, and what's happening in the meantime, and what we all can do to continue to bring it to the forefront. So it's been a really nice engagement having you guys here. Maybe we should just keep going for another week. What do you think? Yeah. That is one of the nice things. Things quiet down quite a bit here in the winter in Corning, which gives us the opportunity to do some different things with our programming. Summertime, we're incredibly busy. We have a ton of guests flowing through here. It's very important that our demonstration spaces are constantly turning over, so new groups of guests can get in and see some glass making. But when things are a little quieter, it gives us an opportunity to go a little more in depth with some more elaborate glass making, bring in some guests to work with us. So it's a great opportunity, really nice to be able to take advantage of it this way. And many of you may have tuned in last year in January. We had a wonderful collaborative flameworking guest artist situation then as well. We had artists Dan Coyle and Hoobs and Rhino join us. They made an incredible piece last year, which just got us more inspired to bring in another group of talented folks and see what these folks could all do this year. And we're really hoping this does become at least an annual thing. It's a great way to really highlight what's possible with flameworking and what's possible when you get a group of talented artists together, give them the right studio space and let them go to town and do what they do best, which is making amazing things. And when you bring in a collaborative environment like this, they're all sort of feeding off of each other. Wonderful time. And for those of you who might be watching the live stream, maybe you don't live all that far away, well, maybe come and join us tomorrow, and you can see the final moves that they're putting on the piece here. These guys have been really wonderfully sociable with our guests here as well. So if you have some questions and you're in the area, sure, you can type them in online, but you could also come in here and hang with us and chat it up with these guys. All right, getting another branch structure going here on Hickory's end of things. So Phil is trimming some of the shingles so they'll fit just right for the dimensions of the roof. A lot of folks are surprised when they see us just cutting through glass with a pair of shears or scissors, essentially. But when the glass is hot enough, it's actually pretty easy to cut through. The trick is you do need the glass to be plenty hot. As it gets cool, it gets more rigid. If you squeeze a little too much and the glass is too stiff, it cracks. So we've got to have the right temperature. You need to be pretty quick and accurate too. If you're too slow, the metal shears are cooling the glass and it will stiffen up too quickly to finish cutting what you need to cut. Also, if you're not accurate enough, you trim a little bit, you realize you need to trim again, maybe you miss a little bit again, and next thing you know, you just keep trimming more and more material away, and you wind up with not enough left. So it is important to be quick and accurate, get your temperatures right, and temperature and timing, absolutely crucial with all glass making. Measure twice, cut once, hopefully. All right, so that is the chimney that Phil has in his hand here. We have this beautiful sort of cobblestone style chimney. Looks wonderful. Now, I should point out, I mentioned how the green glass looks a little orangey when it first comes out of the oven. Well, most colored glasses do not look their true color while they're hot. Different colorants and different colored glasses will glow some different colors at different temperatures. We won't see the true colors of the piece until it's back to room temperature. So we're going to see some variations here. You get an idea of the overall patterning, but as far as the actual true colors, we're not going to see those until the pieces cool again. So I mentioned the chimney was going to be the mouthpiece for the function of the pipe. So this is hollow all the way through here. So where Phil is holding the glass is a hollow clear glass tube, and it's hollow all the way through there. And he's preparing the hole at the other end of the form, I suspect, getting that right, so when he goes to attach it to the rest of the functioning parts of the form, it'll be a nice clean attachment and attach on there good and clean. Attachments need to be nice and clean. Wall thicknesses need to be nice and uniform. We don't want awkward acute angles where things come together. So setting up the edges that are going to come together for all these attachments, whether they're hollow or solid attachments, absolutely crucial. So just trying to get that all nice and neat, get the diameter just right. Using a piece of graphite. The piece he was just putting inside of the tube was graphite, and we call this a reamer. Allows us to sort of open up hollow forms. And he's got a graphite paddle right next to him as well. Lacey has a graphite plate right under her torch. Graphite's a really handy material when you work with molten glass. It accepts the heat really well, and no matter how hot the graphite gets, it'll never stick to the molten glass. Most other materials, as they heat up, they will tend to stick to molten glass. So you can imagine that could be a bit of an issue. It's another reason we want to be quick when we're using other tools of materials that could wind up sticking. We don't want them to heat up too much. We also don't want the tool to cool the glass too much in most circumstances. All right, looks like we're getting ready to start assembling some of the shingles onto some framing here. As Lacey and I were talking about who she was bringing with her to collaborate and why, she was quite insistent. Hickory, that pattern work and the compositions of trees and leaves, perfect. And Phil with his really methodical, systematic building skills, which I've really enjoyed sort of watching how he's setting up each of these different components so they do assemble cleanly into a good structure, both compositionally and also a good physical structure for structural integrity of the finished object. And just a very sensible way of going about things here. Things are sensible when you see how sensible they are. They don't necessarily come to your mind all that easily. So hopefully, I'm learning a lot watching how he's going about this, and hopefully a lot of you folks at home and also here in the audience are learning a bit about how to go about a good systematic process, good way to construct something elaborate. Will the shingles go on in sheets? Yes. Yeah, so Phil's explaining like real shingles, they will be sort of layered and sort of offset over one another. So yeah, if the treehouse gets hit with rain, the rain should flow right off of that roof, just like it should. You gonna put some gutters around it too, or nah? All right, yeah, that's a good way to rinse the tree. All right. So he's getting this row of shingles attached to the framework. We can add on the next row of shingles. And of course, each individual shingle has some clear glass that connects it to the shingle next to it. And eventually all that clear glass is going to get removed. But he's got to keep it all on there until everything is attached. Keeps all those individual parts from shifting around as he's continuing to build the construction here. I know a lot of folks wonder about how much waste we might create. Well, it takes glass to make glass. Sometimes you have to use a lot of these clear rods as bridges to hold different elements in place. And theoretically, we could recycle that glass. It could be remelted. But borosilicate glass melts at a very high temperature. And it's also really corrosive to furnaces. When you get this glass to a temperature where it's volatilizing, it starts to really chew through the linings of the ovens we use to melt glass. So if you're not melting enough quantity of glass, it really can be inefficient to try to recycle it. So a lot of these little bits, unfortunately, they won't get recycled, but they are necessary to be able to put together a composition like this.
Like if you look at my actual waste from like 3 days in my cup, I'm still
Yeah.
using all these little teeny tiny little, I'll use it
Nice.
to their tiny little nubs.
Yeah, Phil's just pointing out he's not wasting much. He's been putting all of his waste from the whole week in this little cup here, and the cup is maybe a third full, so there's not too much waste. He's pretty good at working these all the way down. Yep. All right, so time for the next big move here. Lacey's picking out a good branch to add. Phil's got those Kevlar gloves on. Here we go. A little OMG from Phil as he was pulling that out. It keeps getting heavier. Every attachment is adding a little more weight, a little more weight. You want to give any guesses on how heavy that might be at this point?
It's about 10 or 11 pounds.
Okay. Yeah, Phil's thinking maybe 10 to 11 pounds. Yeah, and there's a lot more to be added still, so yeah, got to figure this is going to get up around maybe 15 pounds or so by the time it's done. Yeah, weigh myself and hold it on the scale, like I do with my puppy. All right, I've identified the spot where this next structure is going to go, or this next branch cluster. And take a close look at the color of the leaves. Still a little bit of an orange tinge. You'll notice the leaves on the branch that Lacey's about to apply to the sculpture, they're more orange than the rest of the leaves on there because they've been splashing through the flame. And these guys are watching closely. Those leaves are a really good indicator as things are cooling down. So she's got a nice clean attachment now, just sort of bending that into exactly the spot she wants it. Dodging bits of flying glass that she's throwing at herself. And really trying to fill in this leaf and branch canopy here. So she's being very thoughtful in exactly where the branches are attaching and then sort of bringing them in together with one another to get the right density of leaf coverage in here. Really don't want much sort of dead space in amongst all these branches. So once again, she's attached the branches together. That attachment still needs some refinement, but right at this very moment, she's attaching a couple different leaves to one another, so that will hold the larger branch in place, and then she can go back to that initial attachment and clean it up. So it'll be nice and structurally sound and aesthetically be nice and clean. by making all these interconnections of all these different elements, we're gaining a lot more structural integrity to the final piece. Glass is going to be a lot stronger by being attached in multiple spots rather just in one than just in one spot. So another important tip for those of you who might be new to bigger compositional work to think about as you're growing your work. Getting things interconnected in multiple spots really adds more integrity, more structural integrity, assuming those attachments are good and clean. All right, so just getting that connection refined, cleaned up, flowing all that glass together to nice clean curves. Phil's pointing out those leaves are going green. Notice he just got his gloves on. So Lacey's fine with the flame in that one spot because it's plenty hot, but we don't want to let that flame splash anywhere else around the piece. Not at this point. So identifying a spot for adding the next branch cluster, thinking about what else really needs to fill in to fill out that canopy of leaves and branches up top there. Boy, it is really coming together. And ultimately, they're going to make a spiral staircase that will go from those base roots up to the decking. So they've also made sure to keep an area clear where they're going to add that spiral staircase. All right, and away she goes for another 15 minutes or so. Let the composition soak some heat in.
Steal some leaves from you after the project is done and ready for you. By the time you need it.
And it's been a constant process. I mentioned Lacey, when she arrived here, had this big Ziploc bag filled with glass leaves ready to go. But to attach them onto the branches, we do want them attached to rods of clear glass as little handles, what we tend to call punties. So that is another step in the process, is getting leaves attached to punties, and then the puntied leaves can get attached to branches. Lots of layers to what's going on here. So Phil is happy with how the chimney is looking and how he's gotten that connection point cleaned up. So he's just leaving that out in the open air. That can cool down safely in the open air. Ooh, the door. So Phil's sort of eyeing how the different parts fit. He selected one specific panel of this wood grain glass to be the door because it has a really nice, unique pattern to it. So he's sort of eyeing exactly where it's going to be connected, where he needs to add little bits of connector material, making sure it's sized just right. None of this is haphazard. Every move is considered and processed and measured. Too many parts need to come together in this composition to wing it. Really been fun to watch this all come together here. So these guys have been making all the different elements and then shaping the elements and then attaching them and just building out this amazing composition here. We have definitely never seen a piece like this created here at the Corning Museum of Glass. It is a statement. Yeah. Another little sneaky move here. Phil's using that brighter flame. He pulled a lot of the oxygen out of the flame, so it goes a little more yellowy orange. Provides a little more light. He's actually trying to look through some of that semi-translucent glass to see if there's might be anything that cracked in there. Looking pretty good. Excellent. Always a smart thing to do as you go along through a sculpture like this. It happens, little bits might crack, and as long as you catch them at the right time, you can typically fuse them, or if you need to remove a bit and replace it, it's still an option at this stage of the game, so it's crucial to keep identifying any things.
Colors with all the metals in them tend to be volatile.
Aha.
Hairlines plus these little tiny air bubbles, and when you stretch them,
Yep.
you got to melt them all back. So
Yeah, Phil's pointing out the particular colored glass that they're working with here, it has a lot of metal oxide content to it. And that tends to make it even a little more volatile than other glasses, so more prone to having some little issues with little cracks forming. So it is crucial that they continue to really look very thoroughly at the piece as they build it. And there have been some little hairline cracks that we've identified, and these guys have been able to fix them as they've gone along. That's going to tend to happen in a piece this elaborate. No surprises. There's a saying in the glass world, it's not what you can make, it's what you can fix. And that holds true a large portion of the time. Sure, what you can make is very important, but you're always going to have moments where you've got a little bit of adjusting to do, or a little bit of repair work to do, or replacing different elements that may decide to crack as you're working with them. Glass is a really temperamental material, very difficult to work with. We typically say it takes between about 4 and 6 years of learning to work with glass before you really start to become proficient with it. Really start to become an advanced beginner, essentially. There's a lot of feel involved, and there's a lot of technical information to understand about the material. Really does take a while, and it's absolutely the sort of thing that you will, if you're the type that is prone to lifelong learning, it will certainly provide that for you. I can certainly say that for myself. I've been flameworking for 27 years, and I have learned a whole bunch just this week, just watching these guys work. Talk about that 4 to 6 year range. And that's not just, I took a weekend class 4 years ago, so now I'm an advanced beginner because I did that 4 years ago. It's 4 years of working 40 plus hours a week and really working with the material, building a relationship with the material. Personally, I tend to think of glass almost as a living organism, and you really sort of build a relationship with it. You learn how it moves, you learn what it wants and what it needs and how you can provide that for it. And there are times that it talks to you. There are times that it yells at you. Times it seems to laugh and mock you. And then there are the times that you come to a really beautiful agreement with it and things work out great. Ideally, as you gain experience, those moments become more and more common. Yes?
I don't know if you want to talk about it or not, but people are asking about how much gas and like the carbon footprint of a piece like this.
Aha. People are asking online about how much gas we use and the carbon footprint of flameworking. Well, let's see. Probably the easiest way to measure this, if I'm working at my home studio, I have an oxygen cylinder of compressed oxygen that is a 300 cubic foot cylinder. And if I'm really cranking along, running big flames the whole time, a 300 cubic foot cylinder will last about 6 hours. As far as the propane usage, If I have a 20-pound propane cylinder, which is sort of the standard size you use with your home barbecue grill, one of those will tend to last maybe about 20 hours of really aggressive work. So that gives you a little idea. And then you can do the rest of the math. This piece is going to take these guys about 200 hours to put the whole thing together. So yeah, I'll let our audience do the rest of the math on that. But yeah, flameworking tends to be one of the most inexpensive ways to work with molten glass, as far as the expense of the equipment, and also the fact that we can shut the equipment off when we finish working. As we compare this to furnace-style glass blowing, if you have a furnace of molten glass, that furnace stays on 24/7, whether you're working with it or not. And a lot of people, as they build a glass blowing studio, they think, oh, this equipment's pretty expensive. And then they turn it on and they realize the real expense is keeping the studio running. The equipment's pretty expensive, but then to keep it running is very expensive, very resource intensive. So flameworking really does tend to be one of the most efficient ways to work with molten glass.
I have an oxygen generation system.
Mhm.
It uses less power than a space heater does.
Wow.
Yeah.
Phil just mentioning for oxygen, for his setup at home, he has an oxygen generating system. So many folks may have seen oxygen concentrators that are used in the medical industry that will draw oxygen from the air around them. If you link a few of those together, you can actually run a torch off of them. And he was mentioning that his setup actually uses less power than a space heater. So he's able to make quite a bit of glass and really keep his expenses and even his electrical usage down quite a bit. Yeah, there are ways to be more and more efficient with this stuff, but yeah, ultimately, working with glass, you do have to achieve certain temperatures, and that takes energy. So hopefully we continue to progress in how we generate that energy, but we're constantly looking at how to improve things. Phil wants cold fusion technology. I was over in Murano, Italy, back in March of last year, and most of the furnaces were actually shut down over there while I was there. Their gas prices had gone through the roof with the war in Ukraine, and their gas prices had gone up tenfold. So a number of studios were shut down over there until the gas prices could come back down to a more reasonable level. They couldn't afford to make the work. And thankfully, those prices have settled back down a bit. So to my understanding, most folks are fired back up over there. But yeah, it's certainly a concern. It is something that a lot of folks in the glass industry continue to explore, looking at ways to run studios in more green ways. Hickory put solar panels on his house. Do you run any of your studio off of that? Yeah, you run your annealers off of that?
It's part of it.
Nice. Excellent. Yeah, so he's able to use some of that solar energy to run his oven. Yeah, and yeah, good point, Olivia. And that's in Vermont. You guys, you see the sun like 3 days a year, so that's pretty good. Which is about how often we see it around here in Corning too. Now you get a little more sun than that, I know. All right, just noticing the time here. 3:54. So maybe we can sneak in one last move. So if you do have any other questions, either on the web or in our in-person audience here, this would be a great time to ask. We'll see, these guys might be able to squeeze in one more move on the big composition, give you one last look at that. But again, we are going to continue to share as much of this process on our social media. That's at Corning Museum on Instagram. I've been sharing a whole bunch on my personal Instagram as well, at Eric's Glass, all one word, Eric with a C. And also this live streamed video, give us about a week and this will be up on YouTube for perpetuity. And we will also have images of the finished piece on the video. So you're not going to see the finished piece just yet, but you will have an opportunity online. And if you can make it here to the museum tomorrow, great opportunity to see these guys finish up this piece in person. Question from the web. Who makes the torch that Lacey is working on? That would be Glass Torch Technologies. And they are actually about 30 minutes away from here, just over the line in Pennsylvania. And actually, all three of these guys are working on GTTs, which are some of the hottest torches in the industry. Yeah, a little shout out to Willie and Wally. There you go, guys. Yeah, they're very close by. Sometimes they pop up and say hello. Willie was just in town a couple weeks ago when Eugene Goins was here teaching.
I don't know if you want to say anything about differences between annealing glass blown work and flame work.
So some questions about annealing, which is the slow, even cooling of glass. Borosilicate glass anneals at a higher temperature and for a shorter period of time than soda lime glass. Soda lime glass is what we use for our furnaces, for our glass blowing demonstrations. Because it expands and contracts a lot more than the borosilicate glass these guys are using here, it requires much longer annealing times. And also that work tends to be quite a bit thicker. And annealing times are based around the composition of the glass and then the thickness at the thickest point. All right. Looks like we got one last branch all prepped up. Phil's going to put the gloves on here. I'll give you one last good look at the composition as they add one more element to it. It's been hard to get these guys to stop working. Guys just go at it, which I don't want to stop them, but I just want you guys to not completely exhaust yourselves. Yeah, I know. It's been hard to get them to stop for lunch. These last couple of days, they've spent about 15 minutes just throwing food down their throats in the mid-afternoon and just jumping right back on the torch. These guys are driven. Love it. Alrighty, so Lacey's got that next cluster ready to go. We'll get the composition out of the oven. last attachment. And again, you notice the sort of the orangey cast to the leaves right now. All right, so setting up the heat, trimming that branch to just the right size. And here we go. Let's get it attached. Lacey's being very careful that it doesn't get any taller than that one tallest branch there. If she does, we're going to run out of room. We're about a half inch from the top of the kiln. You guys are true to your word. Came in here insisting they were going to fill the kiln, and they are definitely doing it.
I literally wanted to make this piece for almost a decade also.
Nice.
Waiting for the right time.
Mhm.
So I've been making so many trees. People will ask me, when are you going to do a tree house? And
Nice.
I don't know, whenever I get the opportunity.
Chris has been really excited to get into a tree house like this for a long time as well. So it's nice to see dreams being realized here. It's awesome. Yeah, the right opportunity, the right team. Perfect.
Fill kiln just like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it is quite an experience to work on a piece of this level and complexity and scale and quality. Yeah,
It takes a good team of people.
yeah. Chris is reinforcing the idea that it really does take a team of good collaborators to pull something like this off. To do it solo is pretty outrageous.
I mean, just lifting the kiln door.
Yep. You can see how much teamwork is going on here, and it's necessary. Even just getting the piece in and out of the oven, it's really important to have someone else there to open that door and close the door. One less thing to think about, one less move that you have to make so you can stay focused on the piece. All right. So just reinforcing the attachment here, getting it all cleaned up and smoothed in. Yeah, Phil's pointing out we're losing that orange cast to the leaves. We're seeing more and more green, which is our sort of our thermometer / timer, the color of the green. So sort of envisioning what the next moves are going to look like, where that ladder, the spiral staircase is going to go. And we'll get this back into the oven, let the piece continue to soak with heat. These guys are going to continue plugging away on it as it smoothly goes into the oven. We'll tuck that away. And we thank you all for joining us here in the amphitheater. How about a nice round of applause for our artists? Chris Hickory Vickers, Lacey Laceface Walton, and Phil Siegel. And thank you all for tuning in on the web. And we hope to see you here in Corning soon. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good afternoon.